Picture this. You're standing in the shower. The water's gone lukewarm. You have no memory of the last 8 minutes. But somewhere in the space between shampoo and silence, you just won an argument, completely, devastatingly, against someone who doesn't even know they bothered you yet. Or you're driving, familiar road, autopilot, and somewhere between two exits, you just delivered the most perfectly constructed response to something a colleague said 11 days ago. Your imaginary audience was moved. Your imaginary self was calm and clear and finally understood. Then a horn blares. You glance at the speedometer. And you quietly return to your body like a person sneaking back into a room they were never supposed to leave. If that landed a little too close, good. Stay with me, the real subject, because what I want to talk about today isn't just daydreaming in the casual, universal sense. Everyone drifts. That's not what this is. What this is when drifting stops feeling like an occasional detour and starts feeling like where you actually live. And the reason this pattern rarely gets discussed honestly is because the people who experience it most intensely are almost always the last to flag it as a problem. From the inside, it doesn't feel like dysfunction. It feels like oxygen, the neuroscience. So let's start with what's physically happening inside the brain when this occurs. There's a structure researchers call the default mode network, a web of interconnected brain regions that activates reliably when you withdraw attention from the external world. The moment you stop tracking what's in front of you, this network powers up. And it begins constructing an interior experience, your memories, your fears, your hopes, conversations you've never had, futures you're not sure you'll ever reach. This is the brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Simulating, rehearsing, processing, but in certain individuals, something shifts. The default mode network stops being a background process and starts becoming the preferred channel. The brain essentially learns, through repetition and reinforcement, that internal experience is more emotionally satisfying than external reality. And once that preference becomes established, the outside world begins to feel flat. Thin, like something essential has been drained out of it. The research, a clinical psychologist named Professor Eli Somer, working at the University of Haifa, formally documented this pattern in 2002. He named it maladaptive daydreaming, a term that's clinically useful even if it doesn't quite capture the texture of living it. What his research revealed wasn't trivial. The individuals he studied weren't occasionally spacing out. They were spending hours each day, in some cases the majority of their waking hours, inhabiting elaborate inner worlds. Worlds with recurring characters, evolving storylines, emotional arcs that unfolded across months and years. And across nearly all of them, one thread connected their experience. The imagined world gave them something the real world had not. Not escapism in the shallow sense, not laziness or avoidance for its own sake. Something more specific. The inner world offered control. It offered emotional completion. It offered a version of connection that felt safe in a way real relationships, for whatever reason, had not yet managed to feel. You can rewrite a conversation inside your own mind. You can run it again. You can let the other person finally hear you, really hear you, in a way the actual human in your life perhaps never did. That's not weakness. That's a remarkably sophisticated adaptation. Where it becomes costly, the difficulty arrives gradually, because as the brain learns, deeply, structurally learns, that emotional needs can be satisfied internally, re-engaging with the friction of real life starts to carry a real cost. Real people are unpredictable. Real conversations don't follow your script. Genuine intimacy involves sitting inside uncertainty for extended periods of time with no guarantee of resolution. The inner world never disappoints you that way. So you return to it, and the returns become more frequent. What's important to understand here is that this pattern isn't a creativity trait. Some of the most imaginatively gifted people alive don't experience this. And some people who've never pursued any creative output in their lives do this compulsively. Every single day, without exception. It's not correlated with intelligence. What the research does point toward is a personality dimension called absorption, the tendency toward deep, immersive, total engagement with internal or external stimuli. People high in absorption are the ones who get completely restructured by a piece of music, who feel genuinely hollowed out after an emotional film, who carry the weight of fiction the way others carry the weight of memory. They feel with unusual intensity. So they built an internal space where that intensity could exist on their own terms. The shame cycle, and then there's the piece that makes this pattern self-sustaining. When you're 30 minutes into an internal scenario, some version of resolution or recognition you've been carrying for years, some part of you knows time has been passing. Some background process is quietly aware that the world kept moving while you were elsewhere. And when you surface, there's an emotional residue that's difficult to name but instantly recognizable. Not guilt exactly, not quite regret, something quieter and more complicated than either. And before any conscious decision has been made, you're already partially back inside. This is the cycle that compounds. The discomfort of resurfacing fuels the pull to return. The return deepens the pattern. And the pattern gradually occupies more of the space where life might otherwise be unfolding. But here is where I want to be very careful about the framing. None of this makes you broken. Not even fractionally. The people who develop this pattern are, statistically, people who at some earlier point needed a way out that the external world was not providing. Perhaps their environment wasn't emotionally safe. Perhaps they were profoundly lonely in spaces that were supposed to feel like belonging. Perhaps they were simply more sensitive than the particular world they arrived in was equipped to handle, and this was the most creative, least destructive response their nervous system could generate. The daydream was not the problem. The daydream was the solution to a problem that existed before it. The only real question, the one worth sitting with, is whether it's still serving the same function now, or whether it's begun to extract something from you. The actual work, and this is the part one want you to actually pause on. Because when people recognize themselves in this, the first instinct is often to want to dismantle it. To eliminate the inner world entirely. To become someone who never drifts, never disappears, never builds anything behind closed eyes. But that's not what the evidence supports. And it doesn't make psychological sense. The inner world is not the enemy. The question is what it's currently doing for you that reality hasn't yet learned how to do. What does the imagined version of connection offer that you haven't allowed yourself to ask for directly? What does the fantasy resolution give you that you haven't yet permitted yourself to actually pursue? What is the rehearsed scenario preparing you for that you haven't yet found safe enough to actually attempt? The capacity to construct entire emotional worlds internally, with coherence, with nuance, with characters that carry real psychological weight, that is an extraordinary capability. It is not a symptom to be corrected. It is a resource that has been pointed inward, mostly because pointing it outward never felt safe enough. The real loss isn't the depth of the inner life. It's that somewhere along the way, a decision was made, quietly, without announcement, that this much depth was only safe when it was invisible. Close. So if you watched this entire video and felt something more than intellectual interest, if at some point you had to consciously remind yourself to exhale, I want you to hear this clearly. You adapted, privately, skillfully, in a way nobody around you recognized or acknowledged. Most people doing this have never once had it named for them. Knowing what's happening is the beginning of being able to choose what to do with it. If you want to go deeper on the psychology behind patterns like this, perception, behavior, the architecture of how we construct our inner and outer worlds, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And if today's video resonated with you, share it with someone who might recognize themselves in it. Sometimes the most useful thing we can do for someone is simply show them a mirror that actually works. See you in the next one.